Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Scott and Sonnet. It's great to be here. Thank you all for coming out. I'll just correct that residential school note right away. It's not about the history of residential schools. It is set in Alberta and there is a residential school in it, but it's not. Just don't worry about it till it comes out. Okay. So I'm going to read 6 pieces from Recipes from the Red Planet, and then one new shorter piece. And I'll just say, when I was working on this book at Sage Hill, I had the good luck to work with Nicole Broussard on it. And she noticed that I had written a few pieces about plaques, you know, where the idea of a plaque, you know, that's pasted on the wall somewhere had come up in writing about places around Vancouver. And she thought I should do more of this. And so after I got back from Sage Hill, I started inventing plaque connections. And so the first 4 pieces that I'm going to read are all along that theme of plaques. Somehow an idea of a plaque comes up. The first one is called The Plaquener. I just mentioned that plakken is Middle Dutch for things that stick or stick together or paste on. And all those other words about plaque come from that. The Plaquener. Mother's Day, Workers' Day, battlegrounds, lost cities, massacres, trophies for motorboats, baseball players, horses. Persephone hijacked to the underworld, Gothic reed houses of Uruk. These are my stuff, these layers pasted on, stuck together, pieced. In reindeer horn, china relief, gold enameling. Jade, sealing orifices of a corpse. Medallions for martingales. Openwork tortoise shell. Sèvres porcelain. Medici porcelain. Hinged platelets. Words, commemorating lost spaces and quixotic battles of tongue and sense. I, Plaquener, match hunchfully to my lake of tangents. Row here, row there, pause, oars dripping. To contemplate the city jigsawed on the sky, its columns of noble knobs and notches, interlocking plaques, flittered by millions of silently moving lips. One by one, I gather sky pieces, stand them up, a set of tin soldiers, a toy zoo of dinosaurs, a troop of she-things, tank women, elastigirls, moon dragons. Oh, my moral fibers, my spirits and dispositions, my quixotic combatants, soar across my universe and bring me news of eccentricity. So this next piece is about a plaque which you can still see. It's at the foot of Hamilton Street, just where Hamilton leaves off from Hastings. And it's about the original surveyor of Vancouver, Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton. A plaque for father. She's come 3,000 miles to unveil it. Isabel Hamilton, 70 years old. A man screws a bulb into a camera. I'm Isabel, she thinks, oath of bow, god of flocks and fertility, club welding, grain welding, god of sacrificed babies, him Phoenicians put on temples and tombs. Her father's plaque is fastened to the Bank of Commerce, a granite block of aluminum windows across from the Dominion Tower on Hastings Street. Not me, the child who was sacrificed. It was mother. She was Isabel too, not the god, but the offering. A man in a charcoal suit and fedora, is it Thompson or Dodson, tells her the mayor will lift the veil and shake her hand for the cameraman. Granite cobblestones of Hamilton Street glisten beside the bank. Father's Street, Lachlan Alexander Hamilton, land of locks, defender of men, all across Canada, Hamilton streets. All across Canada, plaques like this one, to the first Land Commissioner, Canadian Pacific Railway, 1885, who, in the silent solitude of the primeval forest, drove a stake into the earth and commenced to measure an empty land. She sat on mother's lap on fallen trees, fat as elephants. Trees towered around them, sheltering them from the rain. Branches like giant wings, mother said, sheltering their wooden cottage with its wooden shingles. Mother's hands gathered her hair, combed it, braided it. Mother read her Little Red Riding Hood. See the word red? The white curve of her fingernail touched 3 black marks. Isabel refused to walk in the forest, refused to wear red. Mother gave her a lace collar that she'd had when she was little. They stood on seaweedy rocks. Look, Father's building a town. Father's axemen chopped lines through the forest, made roads of tree trunks. They burned the ground. They built hotels, trading posts, saloons and docks, churches and realty offices. The 3 of them paddled a canoe. Dodson, or is it Thompson, holds an umbrella over her head, ushering her closer to the plaque. The mayor talks about the great city. By sea and land we prosper. The great founder, Lachlan Alexander Hamilton. Why was I afraid of the tree-wing forest? Little Red Riding Hood had flowers in her woods. Her mother didn't paddle a canoe. She's gone away, Father said. He sat on a log, staring across the water to his town. No, she's never coming back. She can't come back. Isabel reaches to snatch away the veil. Where's the plaque for Mother? Miss Hamilton, are you all right? Yes, fine, fine, my ankle turned. The veil still down, her shout only in her head. His worship's shaking her hand. She's smiling at the camera beside the brass trees on the plaque. So the next piece is about Sister Frances, and I got onto Sister Frances because there's only about a couple of streets in Vancouver that are named after women, and one of them is Frances Street. So I researched her quite a bit, and then when I came to write this book, I thought, well, you know, I haven't gone to her grave, so I tried to find it in the Mountain View Cemetery, and this piece commemorates that. In search of a plaque. I walk a cemetery of soggy grass, wet, low sky, old cedars drooping their rain-sodden arms for King Raven bending atop tip. I walk avenues of stones, yellow leaves, red raindropped bushes. Hills of graves roll up to the sky, to ocean inlet. Blue mountains massively loom over Block 0, Plot 5, Lot 1. Her grave, a patch of grass next to a hedge and the small obelisk of the Evans family. A woman pushes her baby carriage past mounds of dirt and plywood sheets over holes. What would she have said, my nightingale, had she left a memo on a stony, scrolly lectern or a line on a granite pillow? Just asleep? A short nap? With friends? Stepped out for some milk in God's garden. Carrots need weeding. A postcard from her trip. Crossing good. Jotted this on the ferry. My journey just begun. Expedition under. A telegram for Weather's edits. End must art stingfully ever lost in Odel's den. Under a proscenium arch of floral curtains, an angel flying on a pedestal. Fanny Dalrymple Redmond, nurse and deaconess, founder, Vancouver's first hospital for women and children. Amid Gothic canopies and granite monuments, Rococo Italian busts, headstones, bedsteads, teach us, immortal bird. So we've all heard a lot about Gastown and Gassy Jack, the supposed founder. But how many of us have ever thought about his wife? The wife of Gassy Jack. Madeline, or Quahalia, his second wife. His first was her aunt. Gassy and aunt drive a wagon road, bed and table, yellow dog and whiskey from New Westminster, paddle a dugout to Stamp's Mill, a board and batten saloon. The last one, a Yankee traded for 4th of July firecrackers. At Luck-Luck-E maple trees, the sea's edge, mill hands build a new globe in a day. Gassy slings his whiskey and his bears, his scalpings, his shoot-outs. Granville town comes. The commissioner of lands puts the globe in the middle of a street. Gassy and aunt buy a lot, build the Dayton Hotel. But aunt knows she's dying. You'll be his wife when I'm gone, Quahalia. Madeline's 12. A year later, she gives birth to a boy. He plays around Gastown. Some say he's simple. They call him the Earl of Gastown. Sorry, I read that. They call him the Earl of Granville. The parlors, dining rooms, and bedrooms of the Dayton prosper, but not Quahalia's husband. His feet swell, his face turns muddy purple. They go back through the forest to New Westminster, back to his steamer, onward, up and down the river, leave the Dayton to brother Tom and Emma. They say Gassy doesn't have the gear to father that nick-ninny. Is Gassy female? Or is he nothing but a coopered Siwash lover? Emma throws a china teapot, calls him a beet-faced lush. Madeline's husband sends Emma and Tom packing. But shortly afterwards, that plaque-renowned riverboat pilot, the father of Gastown, dies, aged 44. Madeline's 17, the Earl 4. Lawyers tell her to leave. The Earl dies a few months later. The lawyers die. Tom and Emma die. Mrs. Quahalia Dayton lives on, raising a son, a granddaughter, weaving patterns in her cedar baskets. An archivist comes to touch the person of the wife of Gassy Jack. 82, in faded dress, rusty stove cabin with cherry trees. Gassy Jack was your size, nice, good man, she tells him. Can I buy some of your cherries, he says. So the next, I'm going to read two more from this book, and these are shorter pieces, and they're about cities. That was a kind of another point of connection with Daphne, was writing about cities. My city. Oh, before I start, I should just say there are a number of non-English words in this piece which I may or may not pronounce correctly, but in any case, they mostly mean things like place, sphere of influence, region, district, that kind of thing. My city. Walking my streets, L, M, N, 10, 9, 8. I've picked up prosaic slants and dramatic maxims. Set out habits racing to water mains, connected pipes in my steam plant, hooked up my sewers. I've found geography. My Latin quarters nomina locorum, my barrios en droit, my arrondissement of platzes, posti, laid down theses, not hazy ranges, not sweeps and wastes, but macberecs on scent. Are peripheria berserk? Are lugares sensible condominiums? What happens in these bailiwicks for sale, these lots and estates? Do they speak table talk or play charades, my blind men bluff? A thinker sits on a block. Oh, how can I get off this block, he wonders, this stump, this jam, this likening of trolley buses to insects with antennae, these spelunking ruminations, projecting paradoxes, legislatures of colonies and suffrage. And geography says, this is my yodel house. Would you like a window seat or an Alphorn? Okay, so for the next piece, it's about the Chrysler Building in New York, and there's a spire on the top of the Chrysler Building, which is 122 feet long. It's, in other words, it could snag something really big, probably. And also, the top floor was once held this club called the Cloud Club. Invention 26. You plant a pole even taller than the Chrysler Building, right next to it. Then lasso the Chrysler, yank the rope tight, and run the long end over top of the pole. Hoist the Chrysler into the air, swing it round, play tetherball. Or melt a hole under the Chrysler, a D-elevator shaft. Slide the Chrysler into the ground, 77 floors, going down to the lobby in China. Just the wedding cake of hubcaps sticking out above the ground. A little Art Deco stainless steel mountain. You could make the Cloud Club the home of stickiness and clarity. Or hinge it down sideways along 42nd Avenue past the Daily News and the Ford Foundation to the UN. The world's largest hood ornament, its longest javelin, narwhal, ice pick. The largest traffic calming nuisance, cars running into it like ants to a steer carcass. People inside would step through the jaws of sidelators, Going east, all aboard. They'd colonize horizontal walls and vertical floors of history on its side, crawling in and out its eye sockets and fading rib cage. They'd settle into its skeleton. They'd hang out shingles, clotheslines, and flags, set up cook stoves and potted plants, grow a row of stalagmites from the gridwork of windows, a row of saplings from the fallen tree, a line of mile-high crenellated termite nests. So apart from my novel writing, I did start another series of prose pieces, prosy, poetic pieces. And the inspiration for them was Robert Walser, this Swiss writer whose work I really like, but he was actually a copyist. That was his profession way back at the beginning of the 20th century. And he just loved to write things with his hand. He used to just handwriting, you know, just fascinating. So I read that he actually didn't revise his stuff at all. He just focused on the fine handwriting as he wrote. So I thought I'd try some experiments with this. I hasten to say, though, that I do revise after my handwriting experiments. But I do find that they get my mind into a certain rhythm that I couldn't access otherwise. And I get away from the computer. So anyway, this is one piece that came out of that, that experiment. One cannot write about Schubert without knowing more. I will just say this is his birthday. I imagine at age 5 it would have been a very important day for him. He was playing violin and piano. His brothers and sisters were getting born and dying. Father and mother and the ones still alive gathered before soup plates at a cabinet-encircled table. Father, school teacher, mother, mother. He would have cake. He would sing so much that a very important gentleman gave him singing lessons. He would run off to the piano factory owned by the father of his friend and play every instrument in the showroom. He would write songs and symphonies and sonatas as fast as he could think them. Scherzos, rondos, adagios, marches, con brio, con fuoco, rallentando, dolce, estinto, fortissimo, allargando, mezza voce, minacciando, bis, flowed from his fingers. Sesquipedalian motifs, palindromic crotchets, acrostic syncopations, metonymic diphthonged sibilants, conjugations of rhymed chords and intervals. In the house of a wealthy man where he taught the daughters their piano lessons for a year, but had to go back to teaching children in his father's school. He was arrested with friends for mouthing off to police. One friend banished forever from the city. Schubert set his friend's poems to music. He wanted to marry a soprano. He wrote songs for her, but couldn't prove he could support a family. Her family kept bundles of his music for decades, until perhaps some descendant wanted to throw out these yellowing pages of scribbled notes so that he could rent out his attic and his basement. To a musician, or painter, or poet, lost to les couleurs, perdu dans l'aubergine, la carotte, la pain brûlé, la tomate, la moutarde. They don't give a damn about charging rent. le sang, le violet, le vin, la tourterelle, spread out their piazzas free of charge, day and night, for anyone to stroll or caper in, embracing in their ghostly pavements vibrations of flesh and breath. The souls of the strollers and dancers pummel these agoras and forums, filling them like goat skins. They stroke and nudge their diaphanous slates, stretch and rub their paving hugs, urgence to fluctuating cobbles. Schubert died at 31 of typhoid or syphilis. On his 214th birthday, the trout of his quintet flashed their rainbow scales in the streams of my car radio driving past the Holy Rosary Cathedral, where a man twists and lolls, careens out, almost tips his wheelchair as he blindly sweeps an upturned cap this way and that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn. And thank you, Sonnet. Where are you? There you are. And everybody else on the Chthonics committee. It's interesting and strange to be here in Green College because I'm going to date myself. In my day, the early 60s, as Fred and Pauline will attest to, readings were held in the sterile, steeped rooms of Buchanan. There were no couches like this. There was no tea and coffee in the back, no carpets on the floor, no soft light, well, sort of soft light. So there's a nice intimacy to a setting like this. So I'm very glad to be here. I was going to read from the beginning of The Given, but I'm actually, having heard Meredith, I was going to read from the beginning of The Given because Nomados, Meredith and Peter's Press, actually published the first movement of it as a small chapbook, so I wanted to honor that. But I'm going to read from, given Meredith's recent reading a few minutes ago, I'm going to read something a little more fragmented. The Given was actually written as a novel. I thought it was the last in a trilogy beginning with Anna Historic and through Taken to The Given. There are actually references to Anna Historic in it. But M&S thought it was a long poem, so it was published as a long poem. I still think it's a novel. I'd love to have somebody critique it as a novel. It's a very fragmented narrative. It spirals back and back and back to the point of the mother's dead body, mother found dead in bed. And it keeps opening out into the past and returning. I'm going to read, I think, from this chapter, 1958. Let's see, okay. That children being now come to the years of discretion, and having learned what their godfathers and godmothers promised for them, the cord so long attached, beginning to loosen, tightens in the moment of that phrase, who is Margot's godmother, I wonder? Which overseas friend? I'm watching Margot's small back seated in the pew ahead, her short white veil one in a cloud of veils, a line of girls offering themselves up to the mystery of God. Seated between my parents, my mother in her smartly tailored black coat, me in my new shorty, both of us wearing hats with little veils, I watch Mum place her gloved hand on Lucy's knee to still her foot, kicking the prayer bench in front. Lucy in child white socks and shoes. Let thy fatherly hand, we beseech thee, ever be over them. Now it's Margot's turn to kneel before the bishop for the laying on of hands. I'm trying to remember what I felt when it was my turn. Something? Anything? Father Worthy announces the final hymn, and I stand up in my new black pumps, almost as tall now as Dad, who gallantly extends his open hymn book to me. Dearest Mother, say a prayer that the house we saw will soon be ours. It is much the best we've seen, such a gorgeous view of the harbour and the city, large enough for each of the girls to have her own room, and it is at the end of the road with woods behind the garden. No close neighbours, no more living in one another's pockets. We met the owner, who lives in a rather grand Tudor-style house, and seemed impressed with Charles' new position. It all seems too good to come true. Be seeing you in 58, Centennial Sam. Red whiskers, battered felt hat and bandana, riding his mule up the path of a century into the rising sun of 1958. Come on, partner, let's enjoy the party. Hot water radiators in every room. No more buckets of sawdust to lug. Even empty, it's beautiful, and now it's ours. Strange, those rainbow wisps moving across the wall. Oh, it's the cut glass doorknob catching the light. This hideous carpet has to go. Why on earth would anyone put beige with gray-blue walls? Charles won't like the expense, but a very light rose would look so much better. I know we're going to be happy here. That's what rainbows mean. Old bed, new satin eider-down, new Hilroy scribbler, farm girl kneeling on its cover looks like Donna. Big smile as she feeds a calf from a bucket. Tour the hustling, bustling, marvel at the industrial Pacific gateway to all corners of the world. What about a goat, she said. Wouldn't it be lovely, dear? We could tether it in the vacant lot, and then you could forget about all those stones and weeds. Goat's milk would be so healthy for the girls. And who would milk it, he asked. These hands learned beauty. 6 minutes of daily care for 6 weeks did this. Friday. I'm changing my name. Donna says grade 10 is a good time to change. She says Susie's got more pizzazz than it has, even if I'm still boring old Annie at home. Mom is never going to change. Besides, I'm Suzanne whenever she's mad at me. If there weren't enough grubby-looking characters hereabouts, the centennial beard-growing bit is adding more victims by the hour. All this hullabaloo about pioneers, she says, stirring the porridge. Just an excuse to look scruffy, if you ask me. What is so wonderful about plaid shirts and suspenders? And as for the women standing around wood stoves with their aprons on, well, nothing's changed very much, has it? Look up to the minute. Look up to the minute. War paint, she called it. Getting ready to face a world of ladder climbing, gossip eyes at the office party, liquid foundation smoothed on, rouge applied and then removed, and a critical second thoughts wipe off. The silver lid lifted from her crystal powder bowl, its puff dipped, shaken, and dipped again, not stroked, but gentled onto cheeks, nose, forehead. A shine, she said, will spoil the effect. Touch of eyeshadow, mascara brush, and the quick removal of clots, careful outline of lips, and then the filling in of crimson blotted on Kleenex, fluffing of hair, dab of Chanel behind each ear, the judicious choice of earrings, clipping each with a sideways glance to see how it looked. Feet slipped into heels, chiffon scarf with its scent floating around her shoulders. Finally, the coat, dark, its lustrous fur, her neatly gloved hands turning up the collar to frame her face, as Dad bends to bestow a kiss. Careful, she warns. You look lovely, my pet. Setting his hat on his head with a debonair tilt, he opens the stage door to the city for her. Be bright. Look bright. On Sundays, our Lord's mother remains the type of highest womanhood. Saturday. Went skating with Bill and Bruce and Dee. She likes Bill a lot. She has dropped Bruce and is going to make a definite campaign for Bill. Bruce is okay, she says, but he's nothing special. I had to skate a lot with Bruce. Kept her countenance. Put a good face on things. The Odeon is showing the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston. Shall we take the girls to see it, Charles? So much more edifying than Francis the Talking Mule. Taking stock of the first that lagged behind Donna's allouds. Bra, lipstick, pink only, stockings and garter belt, shaving legs. What nonsense! Use the pumice for that. High heels, pumps, not very high. Misterioso, altero. Violetta's repeating his words, such a gorgeous voice. Croce e delizia. The cross and delight of her heart. Yes, both, both. Such infuriating things, these boxer shorts, are in one crease and 3 more appear. Signora dell'Avenere. Seigneur, isn't that what the French call God? To think I'd never known what men wore before I married, but then how would I? Mother called them unmentionables. And of course the boy handled all that, servant's work. I don't suppose Violetta ever ironed Alfredo's shorts. Rank after rank of towering concrete piers march across Second Narrows as construction goes ahead on 3,160-foot bridge. My puppet, he called her, ruffling her hair. All those adverts are not a thing worth looking for at $1.49, $1.49. Of course you have to pay for quality. Now that jumper was a bargain, so were Lucy's shoes. And then the frilly blouse for Margot, a goodbye. Oh dear, at this rate we won't be home before your father. How long do frozen fish and chips take in the oven? Hell's bells, this traffic is the limit. At least we've reached the bridge. Oh, Annie, just look at that sunset. Well, that chap in the car beside us just winked. What cheek! Did he think I was looking at him? What does he think I am? With 3 children in the car, too. A single nuclear missile potent enough to wipe out Vancouver. So what exactly are communists? It's quiet and cool in the basement where the shoe bench is. Dad's hand is rubbing the brown leather of Mom's walking shoe with quiet care. Communists don't believe in private property, he says. They think the government should control everything. But why? Well, they talk about equality, but in fact, people have to dance to the government's tune. Highways Minister Gallardi opened his new $150,000 Calvary Temple here on Sunday. Kamloops is for Christ, he said, just watch our dust. I think I'll stop there. There are a few handouts there on the little book table. I've been enamored of Japanese classical no theater for some time, and a few years ago I wrote a contemporary Canadian no play which was performed in Richmond called The Gull, and Talon Books kindly published it. It's on the table too. But recently I was approached by 4 new music composers and asked to write the libretto for a chamber opera, but they wanted a no-based libretto. I didn't have a clue how a no-based libretto would work with new music. But it was workshopped in August, and the music is fabulous. It's going to be performed very soon. Actually, they're in rehearsal right now, December 2nd, 3rd, and 4th at the Fire Hall Arts Centre. And I thought I'd just read you a little bit from Act 2. It's not very long. It's set in Oppenheimer Park. It's contemporizing, no, quite a bit, and localizing it. It's set in Oppenheimer Park, and the walkie, the secondary role figure, is a young runaway who's found his way to Oppenheimer Park and is trying to settle in for his first night alone in the city. But he keeps being approached by different people, and the different people who seem like denizens of the park. There's a different one in each act. There are 4 acts. Turn out in the encounter with them to be something other than they first appear. And in Act 2, these people who appear are playing the role of the Chthé, the primary role. They each have a story to tell. And in Act 2, the man who appears as a kind of erratic park cleaner working at night and making strange leaps turns out to be the ghost of a member of the famous Asahi Ball team, which was based in Oppenheimer Park and won many championships during the 20s and 30s. And this is from what, if this were real opera, I suppose would be the equivalent of an aria. It's called A Memory Song. And this is where he's recounting what keeps drawing him back to this park. Excuse me, I just have to have a drink. I'm not going to indicate when the chorus comes in or when the walkie inserts a line or two. I'll just try and do that with my voice. This field is where it happens over and over. Benches packed, bases loaded. Out in left field, cheering spectators part for Frank's brilliant catch. 5-footers all, we leap, we catch, and when we're up, we bunt Harry's suicide squeeze. We win again against long-legged big-hitter teams. They don't run so fast. And the fans clap, nips and whites all recognize true Yamato Damashi, true excelling for love of the game. Team caps, team uniforms, white shine, naphtha scrubbed by ardent sisters, new peer cafe jokes and rivalries for girls eager to dance to grace, Belcara picnics on a star player's arm, twilight closing in. We worked days for our dads when not in school. We hauled miso tubs, 100-pound sacks of rice, unloaded truckloads of cans before and after practice. We lived for the game. So long ago, we lived inside that glory. Local stars we were, shooting through the unseen dark, fear clouds massing out beyond the field where we played ball, bright ball. Night's dark, the boy thinks. Outside his bright talk, maybe inside it too. Here's something I've learned. To move on, you have to leave some things behind. You're young, you don't know some things don't get left behind. Our caps, our uniforms, we packed with us to the camps. Even my leap in the last game, I took it with me. And if you come to Shadowcatch, you'll find out about that leap in the last game. I'm just going to end with one new poem. Let me try it out on you. It's quite recent. Talon Books is going to bring out, I'm very happy, is going to bring out a new edition of an early book of mine called Vancouver Poems. And I've been writing some new poems to go with it, sort of updating it. Afternoons, bill put paid to young and out of our heads with ecstasy, driven recurrent over the hump that 1930s bridge, all new drive or lift off from collision with what's closing in, depth paralysis now, lights red, they're racketing through cost incline, inclined to sail, sign for mercurial sparks of evanescent brands, we're leaning into the wind of our passing on, acrylic legs in line, in rhythm, in astrovisors unimaginable to those 1960s ones who jumped from bridge, billboard ledge, 4th Avenue window, looking for 7th heaven's magnolia flesh, or sought a way out from, through midnight's evacuated depths, sufficiently peopled with our own reflection, tower on tower eclipse, since black balls splash, since peace parades high. Hope it's high enough for tugs at flood tide. Taylor's coach lamp pillars raised aglow above that human flood, some 7,000 in from RR yards. The Waggies, stickers, pokey stiffs with canned heat, cracked now, flaring up through vein flambeau or stained. Our mirror glasses, electronic tweets, 10 secs at most, gone digital native. If you lived under the bridge, you'd be home by now. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.
Many thanks to Daphne and to Meredith for these readings. An important component of the Play Chthonics series, and for those of you who have been here know this, is the great dialogue that we are able to have with poets after the reading. And so I'd like to open it up for discussion, but I'd like to also begin the discussion just by jumping in with a question about I guess I pick up off the idea presented in The Given, in Daphne's recent work, and a question about your querying this as a genre, and your sense of why you would like it to be read as a novel, and is it because of the way in which the narrative line is used in The Given to somehow encapsulate the troubled life of Mother during the 1950s, and then have that particular closure that also samples all those other voices in genres? Is that why you would want it to be read as a novel? And then just the whole question of genre, and the ways in which genre is a kind of constraint in reading poetry generally.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's pretty big, Glenn. Yeah, you're right. I think it's a novel, or I thought of it as a novel, because it does have a narrative line. It's not a linear, it's not linear. It is more spiraling, as I mentioned, but it does come to a kind of release at the end. So there's a build up through it, and the language, it's pretty intertextual. There are a lot of quotes from various sources, including newspapers. The voices, in a sense, work against that linearity because they're coming in at different angles. And I really was experimenting with silence between the fragments to see what happens when you put two quite different voices or two quite different points of view against one another with a gap between. So how does that relate to the novel? Well, the novel was always simply something new. And you can say, well, in that light, poetry could be a novel. So I'm very keen on blurring those genre boundaries. I just find them limiting categories. And, you know, poetry used to be identified with the lyric. Well, it isn't that anymore. So I think we need to move on. Maybe we need to just dispense with genre altogether.
Well, Daphne, the novel is always, at least most of the time, in some way relates to its social context. That was sort of what's got the novel started, and it still seems to be a major, and I'm not saying poetry doesn't,
no,
but that's what I, certainly in The Given, that's a very strong component of that writing is bringing in the context of the circumstances and so on. So I don't know if that seems part of your sense of it as a novel.
Yeah, but then a lot of the new poetry that's been written is very much concerned with that too.
It is, yes. So it's becoming more like a novel. You could say. I don't know. I mean, you're right. Those genre boundaries are pretty weird, but that's quite one of the striking things about The Given for me still, and as are the other two novels in that series, that they really do extend out into that context.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's very much was part of the impetus.
How small can a novel be?
How small can a novel be?
Well, there are some that are called novellas, but are really very small. I mean, The Double Hook Sheila Watson's The Double Hook is not a big novel.
A lot of poems are one page or half a page, or novels things.
No, you can have a long poem that can be book length.
Well, Meredith is the author of micro-fictions.
That's right.
And there's definitely, I mean, that wonderful poem about Gassy Jack's wife, that's definitely a narrative. Yeah. And so is the one about Hamilton's daughter.
Yeah, well, and that's why it was nominated for a fiction prize. Even though I think of them as poems. But I realize they run the gamut from highly focused on narrative to more focused on juxtaposition. I was thinking how when you said that about you're really interested in juxtaposing, you know, how does this voice sound next to this voice? That seems to me to be something, that move seems to be associated with poetry for me. That interest in juxtaposition, as opposed to what's going to happen to a character in a situation, which is having, you know, and having had to learn this, I didn't come easily to this novel writing, and a lot of what I've been learning is actually to not do that, right? To not worry about just putting things next to, but I have to be building towards something. There has to be an escalating sense of tension that will unfold as the thing goes on. So, you know, and I've got about 4 or 5 other quote novels where I was trying to do, of course, inspired by Daphne, juxtaposing things, and they were disasters, you know. But yeah, so.
Yeah, well, that's because a novel is traditionally linear. That's because it's plot driven. And so you have these characters and something has to happen between them, and then something reaches a pitch and then it gets resolved. And it seems to me the poetry is much more spatial in its approach. So what happens when you put the linear next to the spatial? What happens with that?
Yeah, because you're saying in The Given, you actually have things building to a pitch and then resolving in the traditional way, but you've got the poetic element as well.
Yeah, yeah.
What about the opera, the 4 parts? Is there some development?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, Jenny, because when we had our first meeting, I had my first meeting with the director. They already had a director who's well trained in no theater, so she and I are kind of together on this. The 4 composers were saying, well, we each want an act, and we want it to stand alone, so that it can be part of our repertoire. So Colleen Lanke, who's the director and has functioned also as a dramaturge for me in this, we went down to a little coffee shop in Gastown and we tore our hair out and thought about this and how can we approach this. And Colleen had a great idea. She said, well, the Gomandate, the full day-length program of No, which isn't often performed any longer, runs through each of 5 distinct categories of No plays. So we could choose 4 of those, and we could have each act represent one of those. And I said, well, there has to be something that connects them together for the performances of the whole thing. And it looks to me like, even though in traditional No, it's the story of the Chthé, the main performer, it's going to have to be the Waki, who's the only one who will be on stage through all 4 acts. So it's going to be the story of the Waki as well as the Chthé. So that's what happens. I mean, the runway goes through something. He goes through a certain, he comes to a certain psychological realization in Act 4 as a result of these encounters that he's having in each of the acts.
I have another one up this. and this actually takes us to the notion of archive, because I know that both of you work extensively with the archive. And Meredith, I know that you returned back to archival materials, and I know you create your own archive when you research. You accumulate a wealth of information, organize it. And I'm wondering about what happens when you return to that archive and how you set limits on the archive for the project, and how the personal archive that you create, that's a culling of items from the public archive, how that begins to settle down for you or get shaped in a way that's workable. Just a question about your working method even with managing archive material when you're using the archive.
Well, when I started on Sister Frances, I went to the Vancouver City Archives, and you know, I read masses of stuff and took notes and photocopied. I've got file folders of stuff everywhere. A limit, I should have thought of that before I started, right? Oh yeah, got to set some limits. So I just tend to, because I just love researching, I just tend to go hog wild and collect all sorts of stuff. And I just, actually I have to filter it through my own memory and wait to see what percolates up after a while. It definitely needs to go through a kind of composting process. Yeah, and initially writing the Red Planet book, I wanted to get away from the archive. I felt oppressed by it. And so I started writing things like My City, you know, that were just inventive. I really wanted to just do invention and not have that intervening step, but I just kept getting pulled back, you know, can't give it up.
So was that a reverse process then, that you started with your invention and then that led you into
Yeah,
the
I mean,
rather than going and doing research first,
yeah,
and then letting it settle out?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because I can't resist looking something up on Google, and you know, like with the Schubert piece, of course, I had to look stuff up and collect all these words that I wanted as textual things, and but I really, the handwriting experiment, and it continues, is to just sit there with a pen and a paper and know, you know, you can't go to Google first. You gotta do your notebook thing first, and find out where your mind goes. So it is a reversal. That's right.
Sonic.
Oh, sorry. At what point do you go from that to the computer?
After I've written something in handwriting, like a lot of it, in pages, or maybe a lot of pages, and then there's all different dates or something, you know. I've written about 11 pieces, but, and then I went and started working on the computer with them. Yeah.
People are still writing long novels by hand.
I know, it's great.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Maybe to pick up somewhat on that question, both of you write in ways that are historiographic or doing work to create history in a way that for me is like, it's what big grown-up writers do, is like really engage with history and with the history of their environment and are part, like acting as creators of the history of Vancouver and contributing to Canadian history. But then there's so many levels of critique with each of your work and critique about the way that history is produced. So I'm just interested in, for both of you, your identity as writers and historians and like how you inhabit your sense of like, I don't know, creating Vancouver or creating Canada when you're working.
Well, I got into it, I stumbled into it actually with Sister Frances was the first thing, and that led to a big long poem in the Vancouver Walking book, and there were several others that all had to do with going to the archives and finding out about Major Matthews, who was the first archivist in Vancouver, and so on. But then after a while, I started looking back at what I was doing, and I thought about it as historical surrealism. You know, that actually you can time travel and you can show the ironies of what happens when people, you know, they charge into life and they've got these big projects, and then, you know, history goes by and, you know, some other weird thing happens that connects, right? And you can juxtapose all sorts of things with no linear sense of time, right? Moving across history as though history was all happening at once, all in the same moment. And this becomes a huge sort of surrealist adventure, right? So that's where I got to with it.
That's no, it's not. No, it's different. It's different for me. But what you just what that surrealist approach is, I don't think of it as surrealist. It's like it's splicing together moments that we think of as having already happened way back then, but. When I was writing Vancouver Poems, I was conscious of how the energies of events that have happened in a particular place still somehow inhabit that place, whether we're aware of them or not. And so the poems were trying to bring that into language. But my identity as a historian has been really inflected by feminism. I mean, that's where my critique comes from, essentially. And, you know, where you come from as a poet now, Sonnet, is so different from where I started out as a poet in the 60s, because there wasn't much written about the history of Vancouver then. I mean, finding the 2 volumes of Major Matthews in MacLeod's books was a huge development for me, because all of a sudden I realized, okay, somebody was actually collecting all this stuff. Right, you know, just only a few years after the fire of 1886, he was realizing he had to get those first-hand eyewitness accounts before people died, and he was doing it. But when, you know, what comes to mind is when Tish was started, those little drawings on the front page of front pages of Tish, there was that sense that just putting a city map and putting where the poets lived on that map was actually creating history. That there was not much underneath that map besides our present. And that was part of our arrogance as young poets then, you know. But who was there? There was Ethel Wilson, there was Earl Burney, Dorothy Livesey, yes, and the woman, I'm forgetting her name, who wrote that novel about the post office strike.
Irene Baird?
Yes, Irene Baird, yeah. Yeah, thanks. But not many other people besides that, writers. So now there's a plethora of them, you know? Yeah, yeah. And when Lee Henderson brought out The Man Game, I was thrilled because he really got that macho atmosphere of what Gastown was like in those days.
Mm-hmm.
I have a kind of cheating question. It's an absolute follow-up to Simon's question and also to Clemens. But I'm just thinking that there's a conversation here that needs to come, potentially productively come full circle. Sonnet was asking about history, but you were also talking about the history of a place. And it seems to me, well, both of you work very much with place, right? So it seems to me that there's a geographical question to be asked. And I think that that question also connects to the discussion we were having earlier about genre. Daphne, you were talking about the novel as conventionally being understood as linear, so historical maybe, and poetry as, in this particular moment, perhaps a little bit more juxtapositional and just more spatial. And I'm just wondering if we could return to that discussion about genre now, having had this little discussion about time and space, and if you could continue your thoughts about genre, thinking about yourself as located and interested in history.
Probably, I know, probably I can't, because what immediately comes to mind is, okay, so where does no theater fit into all of this? And I don't have a clue. I just don't. I mean, it's an old love of mine, and I never thought I'd actually end up writing any. But when opportunity knocks, you open the door. So, Origin, yes. Way back to Origin, Sid Corman. Way back to Shuichi Kato, who taught Japanese literature and translation at UBC in 1963, I think it was, 63, 64.
Was it your idea to do no theater? Like, it's other people that came to you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So when you said that, I mean, being from Toronto, or I mean, I've lived here for over 4 years now, but I have to say, my stereotype of Vancouver is still very much sort of East Asian cultures and Anglo cultures interrelating. And so your work in no theater, I just, to me, that seemed a very Vancouver thing to do.
Well, maybe it is. It probably is. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the history of this city is so much multicultural, and you know, it's taken a while for that to be registered, to be put on the literary map.
We're also talking about Noam just now as community producing. I don't know if it's anything like Chinese opera, but I mean, because you said, you know, they have these all-day things. Is it kind of like that?
Yeah, it's still actually Taki, you know, is still done in temples. It's No by torchlight, and I've been to one in Kyoto. It's very, very powerful. It was. I mean, how do you explain this? That it was developed as for the samurai class, and it's very informed by Buddhist thinking and Shinto thinking. But how do you explain how it can get transplanted into 21st century Vancouver? I don't know. I don't know if it's a successful transplant. I won't know until I actually see it performed.
I just think of all the, you know, the old Chinese operas where they would go on for all day, and they, you know, everybody and their kids would be there, and their animals and whatever, and there'd be peanuts and who knows what. People would like be talking really loudly while the performers are performing, and there's all of this other social stuff happening in the space of the play, but it's around the occasion of the play. I mean, I don't know if this is true of No.
No, it's less true. No is, it's probably, that sounds a bit more like kabuki, but No is pretty, No still has those spiritual associations. And so, and it's it's tragic, and it's a very serious form of theater. But in the full day programs, it would be interspersed with Kyogen, which is very comic. And that's when people would get up and move around and talk, and and it's all, the Kyogen is in much more colloquial language, and No is in an older form of Japanese that many contemporary theatergoers don't even understand anymore. So they know the stories, they follow through knowing the story.
It seems to me from what I know, I've seen the Gull, I don't know anything about Disney work. But the Gull just really struck me as just so haunted, and so much about here that we don't see. And so, well, what you were saying earlier about, you know, the opening out of temporality, so that in a sense the temporal becomes spatial, makes some kind of sense to me. I don't know what to do with the spiritual. It's very interesting.
We have one more question at the back, and I think we only have time for one more, but certainly after the official time runs out, and we will have a little time to mingle and to chat afterwards. But Susan.
I wanted to ask Daphne about Vancouver Poems and whether you felt tempted to revise the old poems, if you did revise the old poems, if you didn't, why you didn't, and if you did, what you did.
Oh, Susan, I haven't got there yet. I'm scared to get there. I don't know how I'm going to answer that. I'll have to start, of course, they're not in my computer, they're not in any CD, so I have to start keying them in. And I don't know what I'll do when that happens, because I'm such a rewriter. It's going to be tempting, but then I could hire someone to do that, or I could figure out how to make our scanner work so I could just scan the pages in.
Thank you, Daphne. Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you.